Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for the Q&A for I Do My Work, directed by Yosef Baraki. My name is Mariam Zaidi and I'm the programmer of South Asian Films at the Real Asian Film Festival. I'm so happy to be here with Yosef. Just to tell you a little bit about him, Yosef Baraki studied film and philosophy at Toronto's York University and Humber College. Serving as screenwriter, director, cinematographer, and camera operator, Yosef filmed his first feature film, Meena Walking, which actually showed at the Toronto Real Asian Film Festival as well, in 19 days. With non-professional actors and heavy improvisation in some of Kabul's most chaotic environments. The result is a loose narrative about Afghanistan's youth issues and an intimate portrait of 7 days in the life of a young girl and her family. Meena Walking premiered at the 65th Berlin International Film Festival, where it competed for the Crystal Bear and the Best First Feature Award. It is the recipient of the 2016 Canadian Screen Award for Best Feature Film under $250,000, along with 15 other international prizes, including Best Film and Best Director awards at Shanghai's SCO Film Festival 2018. Meena Walking was also nominated for the Best Youth Feature Award at the Asia Pacific Screen Awards. His next film, a documentary, focuses on daily life in an Afghan music academy. He returns to fiction with The Children Are Watching, a feature that explores alienation within Afghanistan's surging middle class. So an impressive biography, an impressive body of work. We're so happy to have you here with your new film, I Do My Work. Let's just start with talking about what brought you to the subject matter, what brought you to making this film?
Well, first of all, I wanted to make a film about contemporary Afghan life. Despite having Afghanistan as my background, I do not live there, so I would always ask myself, what level of insight can I offer? I realized I would have to find a conduit through which I could give an authentic account of everyday life. I didn't know what that would look like, but I felt that social institutions rather than individual subjects would give me a broader understanding, because institutions represent like a point where society meets to act out its reality every day. And so I felt like this was the best place to investigate. So I visited the National Theatre of Afghanistan. I visited the University of Kabul, and then the music school. So of the three, the music school felt most reflective of contemporary Afghan life, because it directly represents the effort of the international community and a vast Afghan diaspora working alongside the population and the local government to try and rebuild the country in the last 20 years since the fall of the Taliban. So, because the school is an embodiment of this wider effort to modernize the country, it cannot help but reflect all of the country's contemporary idiosyncrasies. So, for example, it is run by members of the Afghan diaspora. It is supported by foreign governments. It employs teachers from all over the world, and it is home to a student body that is very diverse, from orphans, underprivileged, boys, girls, the middle class, all the way up to the upper middle class. So it really exemplifies modern Afghanistan, because it is a country where you can see extremes depending on where you look. There is a unique coexistence between violence and peace, between progress and tradition. And so the fact that the school contained all of these elements at the same time made it very enticing for me to explore. So this is why I started with the school.
That's so interesting that you say that it exemplifies modern Afghanistan, because you also mentioned that it doesn't come through in the film very directly, but you mentioned that in your director's statement, how this is the only school to do what it does in Afghanistan. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about the significance of this being the only school, I believe, that trains professional musicians, and also just your interest in sort of visiting all these cultural institutions and then settling on music specifically, and the significance of music in Afghanistan and how it kind of over time has sort of maintained its rich tradition.
Well, of course, Afghanistan has gone through many turbulent times in the last 60 years, we would say. And the one thing from just hearing stories about, my family members and friends, and just the research that I would do, you really get the sense that music is always part of the story, no matter what is going on. And in terms of what I saw at the school that really grabbed me was this uh, multi-generational kind of uh, desire to not only perfect the skill of playing an instrument, but also to preserve this culture of music. And I could illustrate that with a story. When I was filming at the school, I would employ this method of walking around and just randomly walking into classrooms because I got the permission to do so, and to see what's there if I would be able to film. And so I walked into an empty classroom, and I thought it was empty, but there was this older man who was sitting on the ground. I asked if I could sit with him, and it turns out that he's a guitar master. A guitar is like a two-stringed lute. It's like a guitar almost. And it turns out that he's the master of this instrument, and he teaches at the school, and he's been there ever since the school opened. And of course, him being much older than any of the teachers even at the school, he's kind of followed this musical tradition of the dutar in Afghanistan ever since, it's from the 60s onward. And so I sat with him, and I had a number of questions for him. And one of the questions that I asked him was, uh, what does it mean, or what do you think it means to be a musician in a time of war? Because of course Afghanistan has gone through so much turmoil in the last 60 years. And so he paused for a moment, but very quickly he looked up at me and he said, Yosef, I just do my work. And of course, this is where the title of the film comes. But more importantly, what I thought was interesting about what he said is that he was a man who was being filmed. He had lived through so much, and he had this opportunity of being asked this question to complain about all the things that he's endured, all the dictatorships, all the coups, the wars, the senseless killings, the invasions. But he chose to focus on something timeless, which was playing music. And so uh, from this turbulent past, this promising present, going into this like uncertain future, I thought it was interesting that he was a man who exemplified that music is always going to be there as long as there's someone who is willing to play it. And this is the sense that I got at the school. There's this conspiracy to protect music and to protect the children who want to learn to play an instrument.
Wow, that's a really great story. And just in your sort of description of Afghanistan and of Kabul there, the city really comes to life when you're talking about all of these different layers of such a complex history and place. And I'm wondering, did you, the film sort of focuses on the school primarily. Were you hoping to show a little bit more of Kabul, a little bit more of Afghanistan, or did you kind of go in knowing that this would be primarily about the students in the school and sort of showing the city and the country through their perception more?
Well, I would say uh, once I uh, once I toured the school, and once I saw what was there, I very quickly became aware that if this film, with this film, I would have to employ a very specific structure and a specific theme that focused squarely on what is going on in the school in a very objective way. So what I'm trying to say is that thematically, there's this tendency to fall back on the well-worn grooves of sharing how derailed the lives of Afghan people are. And I didn't want to victimize the country because, of course, it would have made my job a lot easier because when you walk around the streets of Afghanistan, you can really stumble upon these amazing stories, but usually they're very sad stories of very sad things happening to people, and we're kind of used to that. And I wanted to separate the children from that image because the school was separating the children from that image by giving them uniforms that render them indistinguishable. Without singling out a particular student, there is no way for you to know who is from an orphanage and who is from middle class. Their background doesn't matter as much as the music that they produce, which is kind of like the uniting element. And so part of what was very challenging about this story, and also um, this uh, thematic challenge, and something that I really wanted to accomplish, was to really restrain from focusing on any individual person and kind of offer this broader overview, this objective overview of what was going on. Because let's say I focused on one of the students, I would get to know them better, and eventually their personal story would come out. And what if it turns out to be, a story that somehow victimizes this whole school, when the story is particular to one student, and on the opposite end, what if this person is part of the middle class and they're quite well off, and all of a sudden you're no longer kind of speaking about the people who have had a harder time. And so in this way, by seeing that the school itself, by employing these uniforms and this kind of tactic of inviting students from different backgrounds into the school, they were trying to say something, which is, here everyone is kind of the same, everyone's equal, you don't have to worry about where you come from, you don't have to feel ashamed, we're just playing music here, and this is the number one thing. And so the documentary reflects that in a way where I just don't really, I don't breach the walls of the school. I stay in the school from the first bell to the last bell, and I try to employ this distance observational style in order not to kind of fall into that trap of, again, trying to show the bad side and victimizing the country, so to speak.
For sure. And speaking a little bit more about the students, there's some really sweet vignettes of, just moments with their instruments and with their teachers, and just like, just sort of in their prep. And I'm wondering, this is preparation for a concert celebrating the 100th year of independence. And so I'm wondering what their sort of perception of that was, and if you had a chance to talk to them about what that means to them, because they're quite young, all of them, and I'm just wondering what sort of importance that held to them as well.
Well, so Afghanistan's independence is like the struggle to free itself from British influence, and this goes back to the 19th century. And I would say that the fact that this was happening when I was there is obviously it's a coincidence. I just happened to be there when they were preparing this performance or rehearsing for it. It just happened that I was filming there when they were doing that. So it was, I felt that it framed the story in a way that highlighted the school coming together to celebrate, because I think Afghanistan has had few opportunities to celebrate its past. For the most part, it has been like a bunch of sober memorials. It's a country that experienced war for so long. So when the centenary comes along and it is being celebrated by youth that represents the first generation post-war, I think it was significant to frame it, within the context of these children from morning to night preparing for this celebration. But in terms of how they were feeling about it, I didn't really get to know that, because maybe we'll speak about that later, but I only had one day of filming, so I didn't really get to know them. And of course, referring to the last answer, where I didn't really want to profile anyone specifically. So I really spent a minimal amount of time with each individual student, but just observing what they were doing and the dedication that they had for this performance and this preparation for this performance, you obviously saw that this was special because, again, this is a young generation, a generation that has absolutely no memory about what happened 100 years ago, even 50, 30, 20 years ago, because they're so young. So I think it was interesting to see how it connected the past with the present, because these children are so young and they're celebrating something that happened way before they can remember. just a moment in history.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that I sort of was struck by or sort of curious about that as well was there's a moment in the film where there's a student who shows his friend his piece on the Song for Freedom, and so it just made me think about, you know, at that age, the history of your country is, I mean, you know it, you absorb it through you know, your elders, but what does it mean for you to be preparing a performance that kind of commemorates such an important moment in history? And but yeah, let's maybe talk about those vignettes that are in the film, these little moments, and then also how you structured the film and how you maybe how you chose to sort of approach the film in an observational style of filmmaking, and then sort of how you decided to sort put it together in these vignettes as well.
Okay, so I would say structurally speaking, like there's a flow to the narrative. I felt the way that it went from morning to evening, and so I like dramatic structure that doesn't really scream out at the audience. You know, when I structure it like a single day, and when you have time, when you show things happen. So something happens at 8 o'clock, something happens at 10 o'clock. And especially like when it's a school setting, you kind of get in sync with the audience because everyone who's ever gone to school has an idea of what lunchtime is or what afternoons feel like, and ultimately what happens at the end of the day. So when you introduce this chronological structure, you allow the audience to fill in so much that's not there because they've already lived it. So first of all, structurally speaking, this is why I structured it as a day, you know, from beginning to end. And thematically, you know, you don't want to focus on specific stories. You know, I wanted to create this feeling of omnipresence for the viewer because part of showing contemporary Afghan life was to show work, was to show play, was to show argument, unity, discipline, faith. And since all of those things are happening at the same time, you cannot experience it except with these brief intrusions into these private rooms. And, you know, really, I didn't want to miss a thing. You know, it was just, it's an overwhelming amount of things that is happening in the school at the same time. And the only way you can show it is to kind of dip in and out of these rooms. Yeah, this is how it happened.
That's so interesting that you sort of felt that way to not miss anything, because that's so emblematic of the observational style of filmmaking where you're just there and you're sort of capturing everything. And I'm wondering maybe if you can speak to the challenges of filming in only 2 days. I believe that you were there in the school to film, or around that much time, and also directing, shooting, editing a film on your own. Were there any choices that you made that, you know, choices that you had to make on the spot, or choices you made in the edit to not show or to show certain things that were difficult?
Well, so of course, the crew had to be small. You can't maintain an unobtrusive presence when you have a large team. I had my producer double up as a sound recordist
Okay.
and a young boy who lives on the ground floor uh, of our house in Kabul. He was the boom operator. And I think having him part of our crew actually helped put the subjects at ease because he fell into the similar age range as the students. He was 14 and 15 years old. And so there was this 3-man crew in the school, with me with the camera, then the producer with recording sound, and then this 14, 15-year-old boy holding a boom mic. And so I think it kind of endeared us to the students and put them at ease. You know, the equipment had to be checked by security every day. Obviously, security is very high. So we only brought in the necessities, you know, a camera, a microphone, tripod, and little else because it just made things easier. So, and of course, we only had one day of filming. You know, I say that we had 2 days, but you know, the first day was spent, you know, getting from our contact at the Ministry of Culture. We were referred to the director of the school, and so the first day was spent with the director of the school, telling him about our idea of capturing this this event of the students preparing, and you know, he walked us through the school, and it's almost like the first glimpses of what the film would be like actually started manifested when with this walkthrough with the director, because it almost mirrors the way the film
Mm.
is right now. In that, you know, he would walk us through the halls, and I would immediately see something that I want to capture. Then he would introduce us to students, walk us into practice room, into the repair shop, and this is really where I felt the capable of then undertaking this whole production in one day, because from this one walkthrough with the director, you know, everything was already happening. The school was alive. You didn't really have to do a lot of setups. So the fact that this was a one-day shoot was definitely difficult, and I think it would be different if I had more time. But I don't think it would necessarily be better. I think it'd just be different, because I think what helps the fact that you're only filming for one day in a school like this, and an observational documentary like this, is that it's almost like walking through a forest without stepping on a branch. You're not affecting the environment. You know, you kind of get in, you get your shot, you didn't really alter anything, you didn't really disturb the students, and you kind of got out. And this way, you get kind of a pure glimpse of what is happening in the country today.
Right, yeah. So we have a wonderful youth critics program at Real Asian, and I'd love to ask some questions that they pose to you for the film. And so they're really, really great questions. I love them. So the first one is, can you talk about the convergence of both Western and traditional instruments within Afghani arts and culture, and how that's sort of portrayed in the film as well?
Sure, yeah. So it was it was interesting because just, you know, I grew up in the West, and so it's not like I had this super understanding about, you know, Afghani music. I was familiar with it from just, you know, occasionally listening to it, but uh, when I went to the school, all of a sudden I was faced with these instruments that I had absolutely no idea uh, about. And so the process of seeing these students play these instruments, uh, you know, it was so fascinating, because so the orchestra at the end of the film, and I mean, there's instruments like the typical orchestra instruments like the oboe, the cello, the violin, um, but then there's instruments like the dutar, like I talked about before, which is a two-string flute, and then there's the sitar. You see the boys practicing in the film with their teacher and the little baby, and so, you know, I had this idea that I would, first of all, I didn't know what to expect when I went to the school, and especially uh, I was open to anything. And this I was when when I saw these children play, it was almost like this feeling of, and I think this is also talks about something that I learned from making this production, is that I had absolutely no idea that a child like this would be able to produce a sound like this, uh, and master these instruments. So um, really, I was it, for me, it was a learning experience. You know, I didn't really know uh, specifics about Afghan instruments, but for me, it was a learning experience. And yeah.
Yeah, just to take a moment to also echo your words on the talent of the musicians. Incredible how young these kids are and how they've mastered these instruments and play them like professionals. It was truly a joy to watch and listen to the film. Um, The second question from these critics is, what is the significance of the Afghan National Music Institute, both as a co-educational school and as a cultural institute? So I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe expanding on it a little bit. And who supports the school maybe right now? Like, how does it get funding and how does it sort of operate? And
So the school is obviously, many programs in Afghanistan are supported by the international community, and this school is no different. So it is supported by the Afghan government, Ministry of Culture, and then there's also um, the the Australian government. Because the person who is running the school is a member of the Afghan diaspora from Australia, and so it gets funding in this way, and also you see glimpses of foreign teachers in the movie.
Mhm.
So yeah, it works in this way where it also tries to teach students, different languages, English, so to speak, because you have to understand when your teacher is talking to you if you're speaking in English. And so, in terms of the I guess the unique thing about the school is that, I mean, it has become so easy for us to categorize children in war-torn places, and cap their potential because they come from a place of destruction. Even I found myself in recording sessions thinking that, I can't believe the sound is coming from this orphan child, and I think you think that the damage impairs the ability to grow, but of course that's not right. So much great art comes from suffering, and so there's a refusal somehow to let these children from these places be anything other than victims of war. And I feel like these institutions that are now supported and enhanced by the international community while working with the Afghan government are really giving an opportunity to change this image around, to turn this around.
Absolutely. Coming back to some of the questions that I had for you. So in your previous work, Mina Walking, which we also showed at Real Asian, a beautiful film, and in this film, and I think also in your upcoming film, you've chosen to sort of see the world through children. And I think you do it in such a beautiful way and really sensitive to sort of their perspective. And I'm just wondering that where that interest kind of comes from, and how you've worked in both fiction and in documentary, and the relationships that you've built with kids in Afghanistan making these films. What sort of led you to that interest, and what's that working been like?
So, I guess my worldview has been informed by this tendency to internalize my experiences of the world rather than interact with them. I'm sure that this is not ideal, because ideally I think you have to be interacting with the world rather than observing it. And so this is kind of like my earliest memory of perceiving the world and kind of being in the world but internalizing it. And because this is something that has stayed with me for so long, it's kind of reflective of the present moment. So internalizing this experience of being in the world. So from an early age, I rebelled against plot-driven movies. I loved films where it's like that allowed atmosphere or character to move the story forward. And in terms of working in this way, I think for me, this is the way. I'm not really good at working on a movie in an abstract sense, meaning like thinking about it too much beforehand, researching it too much beforehand, writing it. I'm really good at being in a spontaneous situation and being inspired by what's happening in front of me. And I think that children really do that so well. There is a certain amount of restraint that you face when you're trying to make a film, especially in a country like Afghanistan, where People have reasons to doubt what your intentions are because of the history. You encounter people who are not as willing to be you to be open and to willingly conspire with you to create something interesting. And uh, for me, the work with the children that I do is definitely informed by this way that I internalize the experience and then I try to show it, and then uh, being able to work spontaneously without thinking too much about it. And the children just happen to have this lack of ego, this freedom, unfiltered just brashness, and that was my experience with the character of Mina in my last film, and this was very much my experience with this film. In many instances, I was able to work with the students at the Music Institute to actually enhance scenes to be able to make them more interesting. And also, they were very non-threatening. And of course, people think that when you're making a documentary, you're the one who's kind of intimidating because you have the camera. But of course, I'm the one who's the only one filming these students, and these students are, in their home environment, and I'm kind of like the foreigner there, and so I'm the one who's very uncomfortable. And thankfully, they didn't give me too much of a hard time, and they worked with me quite well. Except for some instances where, I would do something goofy and they would laugh at me. For example, in the last orchestra scene, uh, you're watching this final practice for the Independence piece, and for some reason I had left my scarf uh, on a chair somewhere, and when I went to pick it up again, I mistakenly actually grabbed a girl's hijab because it was the same color. And I put it on my head, and everyone started laughing at me. And I had absolutely no idea why they were breaking up my scene, this natural flow of reality. But this was kind of emblematic of the relationship that you had. These children are very playful, and they're always willing to smile. And I think you see that in the movie and the interplay between the boys and the girls in the yard. And so, what really attracts me is the fact that from this very early onset fascination with um, observing the world from this internal place, to be able to then show and work with children spontaneously and not really worry about offending anyone, and also getting these great ideas and insights from just watching them play. And this was my experience with the previous movie and with this film, and hopefully with my next films as well.
And maybe tell us a little bit about your next film. I know that you're traveling soon and you'll be working on a new project. I'm curious to hear what that's about.
Yeah, so I'm like in the middle of making this film, and I can't say too much about it except that it's about alienation in Afghanistan's middle class. It's so interesting that all the foreign development that has come into the country in the post-Taliban era has created this middle class all of a sudden. And this new middle class is facing their own struggles with maintaining tradition while also realizing their new potential. But there's also the typical problems of, all of a sudden rising up in status and wealth, is that you insulate yourself. And so this is what I'm exploring with the next film. And hopefully this pandemic will not inhibit us any further, and so that we can move along.
For sure, absolutely. I wish you and your team the best of luck in making that. I'm sure there's lots of challenges that filmmakers are obviously facing everywhere in the world, and they'll be there. But it sounds like a really interesting project, and hopefully we'll see it at the festival at some point. I'd love to close with one last question about your current film, I Do My Work. I'm wondering, in the making of it, we've talked so much about so much complexity in terms of the context of the film that you speak about in your statement and in this conversation as well. But also all of these moments that are so almost really sweet small moments with the students that kind of just bring it down to the real world of the school and the daily kind of happenings in the school and these moments. I'm just wondering what your sort of biggest takeaway was in conceptualizing and then creating this project, and then what sort of takeaway would you want the audience to go with after watching this?
Okay, so, speaking about the subjects of this film, um, most of the children who were born uh, at the school, they were born after the Taliban left or well after the Taliban left. So their only memory of war is the impact that it has had on their parents and the environment. They are disproportionately affected, but all of them have inherited a country that is severely weakened because it excluded women in positions of power. So today, the generation that I profiled faces a lot of pressure to turn this around and help move the country forward. It might be unfair to expect so much of the first post-war generation, but one positive, I think, that has come out of it is it has led um, to an acceleration of the rehabilitation. And as a result, women have been granted more rights. There's a consensus, I think, understanding that a country cannot be modernized if only half of its people are allowed to participate. And I think when you're watching this film and you're seeing how this group, even with the theme of it being around Ramadan, where everyone is fasting, there's this theme of these students coming together and doing something big together and showing the world that if you put your differences aside, you can really achieve something incredible, even with terrible challenges that are in your way. And I think this new way of looking forward, which is let the new generation move us forward, but we have to let everyone into positions of influence so that we can accelerate the country's modernization, and then we can move into the new age and write the new chapter in our country's history.
On that note, thank you so much, Yosef, for being here and for sharing so wonderfully about the process of making the film and all of your sort of personal takeaways and what you're thinking about, even stepping into your future project. And on behalf of the Relation team, wishing you all the luck in the world with the upcoming film and hoping we get to see it at the festival at some point. Thank you to everyone watching from home. We hope you're able to check out the rest of the Relation lineup, and thank you and have a good day.